Good afternoon, everybody. I am Heidi Friedman. I'm a partner in Thompson Hine Environmental Group and co-chair of our firm's ESG Collaborative. Very happy and excited to have you with us today, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm really excited about this panel with these two ESG gurus. They've taught me a ton, and I look forward to sharing that information with you. First, we have Michelle Abraham, who's Senior Director of Ethics and Compliance and Associate General Counsel at Cooper Standard. And we have Jillian Potter, Senior Manager at ERM. So we're going to get rolling, but just a few quick housekeeping things before we do. Today's program is going to be recorded, and you will receive an email link as long as you're registered and whether you attended or not within 48 hours of today's presentation. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, we'll do our best to answer those either during the presentation or at the end, as long as we have some time before the 2 p.m. Eastern hour. You'll see in your, on the right side, a question box, and that's where you type your question, and we'll be able to see that and do our best to answer them. If we don't have time today, we'll do our best to follow up. We're also offering CLE credit for today's webinar, sorry. Please be sure to fill out and return the webinar affirmation form that's in the handout section of the control panel on the right-hand side of the screen. The form provides very specific instructions as to where to send the form, and I will give you the much treasured CLE tracking code right before the 2 o'clock hour when we finish up as well. Also in that handout panel there, you'll find a copy of the PowerPoint slides in today's bios of the speakers. So we're just going to leave it at that so we can get to the heart of it. I really appreciate your interest and feel free to ask us questions. So I'm going to kick this off and let you know why lawyers can and must be trusted advisors to ESG on the business side as well as the legal side. So what is ESG? So everyone says, oh, is this just what used to be sustainability? Well, sustainability is really only a component of ESG. ESG is now a much larger umbrella, and it really is a bunch of non-financial factors that all of our stakeholders of businesses are mandating. Everything from the investors to the customers to the board and everyone in between. And as you'll see, the E component is all of the different components of environmental, everything from climate change, GHG emissions, recycling, to social. D&I is obviously one of probably the most popular components of the S, but we have everything from employee compensation, human rights, things like that. And then we have the G, which is a lot where we're going to expect some of the regulations, where the disclosures have been made, the requirements on the board, typically what was called more a little bit of compliance, all now merged together under the ESG umbrella. Ooh, sorry about that. Unless you've been like sleeping or somewhere else, ESG is in the headlines of every paper, every magazine, every news article, every single day. I said to someone the other day, I could spend all day, every day reading ESG content if I wanted to. So it's certainly something new and exciting in terms of, the media. And this really started to, I would say, elevate at the level we're seeing it with the BlackRock CEO, Larry Fink letter in January of this year. And so most of you are probably familiar with that. So why should you care? So there was a 2021 ACC Chief Legal Officer survey that said 65.8% of chief legal officers believe that these types of issues will continue to accelerate. There's, an even crazier statistic, National Law Review, July 2021, more than 95% of Fortune 50 companies now have some ESG disclosures in their SEC filings. And obviously, we're all waiting for the SEC regs. It was supposed to be October and then December. Scoop on the streets is probably going to be January. Who knows? But it's definitely up and coming. And then a lot of companies are global. There's just a tsunami of regulations internationally as well. The most important thing that you're going to hear a lot about today from all three of us is that ESG touches almost every aspect of legal, just, name it, it's there. And it touches virtually every aspect of the business. So it's really an opportunity, one of Michelle's favorite words in this context that she's taught me, to bring together all aspects of the business and all aspects of legal to do the risk management and provide additional opportunities to make strides for all the stakeholders on the ESG front. I want to spend just 2 minutes going over a survey that our firm did recently. So we were getting a lot of calls from clients asking questions. What are others like me in my sector doing right now on ESG? So a lot of companies, unlike where Cooper is, I think what you're going to hear about and what Michelle's been diligently working on for years, are really just getting started now. So we put out a survey. We got 138 public and private companies to respond. And altogether, 48% of respondents had an ESG strategy in place. 33% of those as public, 14% of those as private. And these are in the slides if you want to, it's hard to see on the screen, but you can look at those more carefully later. Secondarily, the heavily regulated financial service industry really appears to be leading the charge, closely followed by healthcare. And then others like manufacturing are really getting up to speed on these issues now. What, as you might guess, as my National Law Review statistic gave you, the larger the company, the more ESG type framework they already have in place versus starting to build it now. So companies with revenue between 500 million and $1 billion, we're sort of all in on ESG already. Other smaller companies starting to build that framework now. So what kinds of disclosures are companies making? So they are currently providing, disclosures on a lot of variety of topics. But what we did here across the board, DE&I was the one thing that was probably the most popular across public, private, and all sectors. And then whether or public or private, we asked the folks that responded, what is your biggest challenge on the ESG front? And we really heard it was data collection and verification. And Julianne will help us with this a little bit. And we really, in our preparation discussion, it really is the verification point that I think a lot of companies are struggling with now. And if you don't track it, you don't treasure it, is one of my favorite sayings. But what you'll see in terms of a risk mitigation standpoint is the data is really what's going to save you later. So we'll spend some time on that as well. So with that background and understanding kind of where you might fit in and what ESG is, I'm going to hand the baton over to Michelle for a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Cooper's journey on the ESG front. Michelle, take it over.
Thank you, Heidi. And for the benefit of the audience, I'll give you some context as to my role and a little bit more about Cooper Standard. We are a Tier 1 automotive supplier, headquartered in Northville, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, with global presence, about 20,000 employees throughout the world. We manufacture numerous components, but primarily your fuel and brake lines, as well as the sealing solutions in your car to help keep water out of things like your windows, your doors, your moonroofs, and lighting and the like. In terms of our journey in the ESG or sustainability space, we very quickly went from a compliant, reactive response to customer inquiries and surveys to a much more strategic and fully integrated ESG process over what I would consider to be a relatively short period of time. So what we're sharing here on the screen is the timeline looking back to our initial inquiries from the OEMs. We were hearing directly from companies like Ford and BMW with the same questionnaires that many of you received today as members of the legal department, possibly partnering with the purchasing and supply chain organization or the sales part of the organization. And those really were just inquiries, right? So it's a survey response where they're asking for information about topics that relate to sustainability. Back in that 2014, 2015 time period, they were much more heavily focused on traditional supply chain topics related to primarily the E, and we'll talk, more specifically about what rolls up under the ES and G as part of the presentation today, and somewhat about the S. But as we've seen over the course of time, those customer inquiries are now focused on all three topics and really looking at the substance of your sustainability efforts. So back in 2014 and 2015, we were responding to the customer questionnaires. We were asking somewhat similar questions of our supply chain, but really transformed our initiative in the 2016 timeframe when we conducted our first materiality assessment. We do work with ERM. Julianne is one of our relationship partners, and she'll share more about her experience in working with us over the course of time. But that first materiality assessment, we went out and interviewed our stakeholders, so both internal and external, to understand their perspectives about what was critical to the sustainability of our enterprise. And using the information in that materiality assessment, we pulled together our first formal report. And you can see without a doubt, as you look over the course of the last 5 years, the continuous improvement and maturity in that reporting process. One that went from kind of reporting on what we're doing within the organization to a report that now actually shares our goals, our progress against those goals, and the commitments that we're making going forward. We've since conducted 2 additional materiality assessments. We're currently on about every 2 to 3 year cadence. And actually just the week before last, Julianne traveled to the Detroit area and we met with our leadership team to report out on the results of the materiality assessment and actually go through a validation session. And again, we'll share more information about what that looks like later in the presentation. But importantly, in the last 3 years, we have significantly ramped up our efforts within the organization. We formed a global sustainability council, and I'm pleased to share that that is chaired by our Director of Strategy and VP of Operations for the organization. That really, in my mind, is a significant achievement for the organization. Up until that point of time, our ESG initiatives were primarily led as a combination between our environmental team, communications, and legal. And now we have a robust group of leaders representing each of the functions of our business, meeting on a regular basis to focus on how we're embedding our sustainable goals into our business processes. You could move to the next slide, Heidi. We were recently recognized kind of as a, actually go back one slide, as you know, a recognition of our progress as being among one of the world's most ethical companies. Some of the criteria in that recognition is focused on your sustainability efforts. We were also recognized by Newsweek as being among the America's most responsible companies. And the sorts of data that those entities are looking at really are set forth in the annual sustainability or corporate responsibility report. Our most current version, as well as all of the previous versions of the report, is available online at cooperstandard.com. There's a section of our website dedicated to social responsibility where you can see not only the reports, but also our key metrics. That was one of the enhancements that we achieved in the last 2 years with the help of ERM. We're now very clearly communicating those metrics as a standalone report, along with the comprehensive sustainability report. From the perspective of the legal department, Heidi, if you could jump ahead to the next slide. There really is an integration between the work that we're doing in the traditional legal department space, ethics and compliance, as well as enterprise risk management. So my title is Senior Director of Ethics and Compliance, but I also have responsibility to co-chair enterprise risk management, and I'm a member of the Global Sustainability Council. And wearing those 3 hats, I've been a part of an effort to help break down the silos in the organization between our risk management efforts and our opportunity management efforts. And that's really one of the most important takeaways I think you can have from today's presentation, particularly from the perspective of the legal department. As Heidi mentioned, I often talk about ESG as opportunity management. And as you'll see on this continuum that we have on the screen now, we look at ESG, ERM, and ethics and compliance as part of one workflow. So we take the information that comes out of the materiality assessment to inform our strategic planning process. Around the same time of year, which is typically now, so in the October through December timeframe, we also update our enterprise risk management risk register, which is the document that has all of the potential risks facing our organization that could disrupt us. So we have a list of opportunities from the materiality assessment, and we have a list of risks from our enterprise risk management. And we bring those two together to inform our strategic planning process. The company identifies its strategic initiatives, and then we step back and actually conduct a risk inventory of those initiatives to identify where we may have potential disruptions. Then conduct the traditional risk assessment to look at likelihood, impact, and speed of onset for each of those. And then for the high priority risks or opportunities, we ensure that we have a risk management and risk response plan in place. So now, when you come full circle in that process, we're actually reporting on the outcome of all of those initiatives that we're undertaking. And if you look at our report back in 2016 versus 2020, you'll see that difference come through. Back in 2016, we were telling you about all the great things that the company did and looking at the topics that were identified as material. Whereas now we're talking to you about the outcome of the materiality assessment and risk management and how we're managing those risks and opportunities and the goals that we're holding ourselves accountable for reporting on and tracking ourselves against. Go to the next slide. So these are some initial perspectives from the point of view of a member of the legal department for an industrial manufacturer. I think it's really important to understand that when you're talking with your teams about ESG, no matter where you are on the maturity spectrum, this is not just about being green. This really is about the sustainability of your enterprise and the points of view of your stakeholders on what is important for your organization to be sustainable. So yes, there's no question that there's a role of an environmental topics and looking at things like your impact on climate, what you're doing for water and climate or greenhouse gas emissions and the like. But when you look at the topics covered by S, which is social, and G, governance, they really are about how you treat the people that you work with in the communities that you live and work in, and how you're running your business to ensure its sustainability. We've also noticed a significant shift. So as I mentioned, early on, the legal department was in the position of two primary roles: responding to the customer inquiries, which often came in the form of surveys where you had to indicate what policies you had and what you were doing to enforce them, and then also that of legal reviewer. Now, we are invited to the table as a strategic advisor in this space. Many of the topics under the S&G have a tie back to legal compliance or to traditional legal corporate governance functions, particularly when you look at the board and other initiatives as to how the organization is run. You must absolutely have support from your leadership team. While the legal department can certainly bring this forward as a strategic initiative and offer strategic values, your C-suite really has to be on board with having an investment in the sustainability initiatives. Certainly, you've got to have resources available to conduct a materiality assessment and then to actually set goals and have a process in place to develop and publish a report that is shared. And that requires buy-in not only from a capital perspective in terms of making a financial investment, but also resource investment, because these subject matter experts that are participating in the setting and the tracking of the goals are also taking the time to do that and then embedding that in their operational practices so that they can ensure that they achieve the goals that they're making those commitments for. Today, your ratings and rankings and all that other information that Julianne will talk about next are really based upon how transparent you are, not yet how well you're doing. So it's safe right now to say that we don't have a particular policy or we don't have a process in place to monitor a particular initiative. But very quickly, and I anticipate within the next 6, 12, 18 months, there's going to be a significant shift from assessing how transparent you are to how much substance you're actually achieving with respect to those goals that you've set and communicated. So we shouldn't get comfort by the fact that we're being assessed on transparency today, but rather use that as incentive to set realistic goals so that we can earn the credit in the near term for the work that we're actually doing and achieving. As I mentioned, this has got to be an integrated approach. Early on, we only had a couple of folks at the table that were working to pull the information together. Today, we have a global sustainability council with representatives from all of our corporate and operational functions around the world. We're meeting on a similar cadence to that we've set up for ERM. That's the enterprise risk management, and then actually looking at combining those meetings, because there are several initiatives that overlap in a way where we can help further break down the silos between the opportunity and the risk management. And the good news is you're already doing a lot of this. So throughout today's presentation, you may feel somewhat intimidated or maybe behind the 8 ball, but in reality, when you look at the topics, particularly under the social and governance areas, odds are your human resources team, your supply chain team, and your legal department are already engaged in many of the activities. The significant shift is actually tracking and reporting on what you're doing in a way that your stakeholders can gain confidence that you're meeting their expectations and needs. We'll transition over to Julianne to share her perspectives from that as an external advisor to companies.
Thanks, Michelle. And the only thing I wanted to interject, and after hearing that before we hear from Julianne, is that, you know, Michelle breezes through this with this timeline and this strategy and all of that. And, you know, I just want to emphasize, having watched Michelle go through this journey, and it really was a journey, that it takes an enormous amount of effort and resources. And so, and it is knitting those pieces together that are already there. And so I remember I was talking to somebody, you know, who is a labor and employment lawyer. She said, well, we don't do ESG. And I'm like, you know, do you do this? Do you do this? But you do. So it is just kind of bringing that all together. But I also wanted to say, when I first talked to Michelle about this, she mentioned that, you know, there's lots of ERM initials here, not enterprise risk management, but the Julianne ERM has just been a critical partner for them. And I would say the number one thing I've been doing for clients is trying to refer them to the best external resources, you know, and teams, which can be built up of you know, consulting firms that are really experienced doing this, just like Julianne is. And so Julianne's going to talk to us a little bit about, you know, a materiality assessment and some of these ranking systems. And I just want to like underline and put in bold something Michelle said at the end, just so we don't lose it here, which is what used to be ratings and rankings on transparency. How much are you disclosing and saying you're doing and working on, you know, sort of giving it the old college try was good enough, and that is shifting. And we expect it to be shifting on lots of different fronts, nationally and internationally, and that's where the data comes in. And we'll spend some time as sort of a panel talking about that afterwards. So Julianne, I go ahead and tell us all about materiality and all that good stuff.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Heidi, and thanks, Michelle, for all of our longstanding relationship and working together. We've done a lot, as you mentioned, in a relatively short amount of time. And I remember thinking back to that 2016 materiality assessment that I don't even think we used the word materiality at the time, because it was very contentious within the organization of whether or not these ESG topics were kind of considered to be material. And so I wanted to start off with the difference in the definition of what we mean when we're talking about sustainability related materiality, as opposed to the kind of typical way you might use the term materiality. And it's really taking those same kinds of non-financial topics that Heidi talked about and covered in the beginning, and expanding kind of how you think about the concept of value, and then also expanding the time horizon that you associate with that topic, and whether or not that topic might have that ability to affect how you create social, economic, environmental value when you think much longer term than you're perhaps used to thinking in that kind of 1 to 3 year time horizon. So that's, you know, when we're thinking about what does sustainability materiality mean, and particularly when you think about the expectations of your reporting and ratings and ESG stakeholders, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about that kind of longer time horizon and more expansive definition of value. So we can move to the next slide. And this is just kind of a helpful visual to think about really what is the purpose of conducting this kind of materiality assessment. Some companies choose to do them in-house, other companies choose to hire a consulting firm like ERM or others to have that kind of objective third-party view. And the purpose of that assessment is really to take this broad and confusing landscape of all of these different topics that are all important in some way, shape, and form, and help you prioritize them based on that risk and opportunity, and importantly now as we think about regulators and changes, the concept of impact. So we're really trying to highlight those differentiating topics where you might have a strong business opportunity or an outsized impact on society or the environment or the economy. And you're really using that to lay the foundation for your strategy, because we know you can't tackle everything with the same level of resources and focus. And so we really want to help prioritize those topics into tiers that help you then decide what to report on and where to invest most ambitiously in the management of those topics and those goals. I wanted to touch briefly on impact because this is a term that you're going to hear more and more, particularly in the new EU taxonomy and the regulation that's coming with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU. And the new, if you're familiar with kind of the GRI reporting framework, GRI has a new definition of material topics that talks more about impact. And so as we're thinking about all of these new frameworks, also I should mention the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is the new entity formed under the IFRS Foundation, also has more focus on impact in their definition as well. And so when you're thinking about kind of that risk lens that is maybe very typical of your enterprise risk management process, and opportunity where we've thought about in the materiality assessment, maybe chances to really differentiate your business, impact is then referring to the effect that you have on the economy or environment or society that may be separate from a topic being financially impactful for your organization. So even if there's a topic where it's not particularly significant for your organization's financial value, even over the long term, if you're making a significant impact on society or the environment because of your activities around that topic, it's now going to be more important that you also report on that topic and collect data around that topic according to the definitions of these new entities and standards bodies. So that's just something that you're going to hear more about as those standards bodies ramp up and as the EU regulation becomes actually enforced in the future. And then we've talked a lot about already ratings and reporting frameworks. These are reporting frameworks. So just there's a difference in that these entities are not judging your performance on your reporting content, but this is where the raters are getting their inspiration for the questions that they're asking you. So all of these various reporting frameworks are coming up with the standards and what they're expecting that companies disclose. And then the raters are kind of filtering out from there their own proprietary mixes of what they think is the best predictor of long-term value and risk mitigation. So this is kind of a very high-level look at each of these various frameworks and what their kind of agenda is, or what their motivation is. I should also take the time to mention that particularly the IR framework, the Integrated Reporting Framework, and SASB, and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, which is a big portion of TCFD, are now combined together into this International Sustainability Standards Board. And then GRI was instrumental as a partner to the EU in their CSRD draft proposal. So there's lots of consolidation already happening between these frameworks, but they are each maintaining that they have their own separate kind of motivations and angles to their reporting frameworks, and that hasn't yet gone away. So when you're thinking about which ones do you want to align with or report to, these are hopefully some helpful summaries of kind of which angles each of them take and the differences between, for example, GRI, which is much more all of your stakeholders, versus SASB, which is very investor and financial stakeholder focused.
So I'll offer that out of all of the things that an ERM type advisor can do for you, I think this is one of the most important places where they can provide advice and counsel. This really is alphabet soup, especially for folks that are new to ESG. And ERM, and Julianne in particular, knowing our business and knowing the data that we have available were helpful in guiding us towards the standards that we were going to measure against. And so our company chose GRI and SASB. We were one of the first automotive to report under the SASB framework. And I'll be honest, when we were making that decision, the internal advisors like myself and the other folks on the Sustainability Council were not in a position to advise our leadership team on which was the right framework. And so ERM was able to help provide that advice and counsel. They were able to explain exactly what it meant for us and what type of data we would need to collect to be able to meet those frameworks. And it is continuously evolving. So while the most recent report reflected 2 of the frameworks, going forward, that could easily change. And it may also change based upon the needs of our stakeholders. So as you think about where you might start to make an initial investment in terms of an external advisor, I think this is one of the most important places because it also sets the framework for your report. And so as you draft your report and tie back to the framework with the references, you need to have a subject matter expert that can help you ensure you're meeting those expectations in the report to fulfill what's sought in the framework itself.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, if people don't feel like we've used enough acronyms in the last 2 minutes, then, you know, we can throw some more. Everyone always says environmental law, you know, has more acronyms. Until I started doing all this stuff, it's hard to follow. And there is a new one every week. I will say under our survey, the vast majority of respondents are using the SASB GRI. Those are definitely the most important. But it is such a changing landscape, and it really is something that's hard to grasp. And I also was hoping that, you know, it's great for us to sort of see the theoretical process of a materiality assessment. A lot of the conversations I've had lately was, well, is that a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 goal? And what kind of resources are you putting at it? I thought maybe you both could share a little bit more about your recent experience with the materiality assessment and the presentation to leadership, and kind of what you're seeing maybe as a shift from your stakeholders from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so this was the 3rd time that we conducted a materiality assessment. All 3 times we partnered with ERM to conduct that assessment. So Julianne and her team interviewed members of our leadership team and our board of directors, as well as some key subject matter experts within the organization. And then also met with and interviewed our customers, suppliers, industry associations as one of the key sources, and our institutional investors. I think, Julianne, there were probably 30 interviews total that your team conducted. They use a standard list of questions to help assess approximately, I think it's 20 to 25 topics. In terms of the relevance of those for Cooper Standard and the sustainability of our organization. As mentioned, the most recent one was about 2 years ago. And so it was interesting to see how some topics did not change at all and others moved relatively significantly. One in particular was diversity, inclusion, and belonging. That was one that actually moved down in importance. And we were surprised to see that based upon the importance of the topic just 2 years ago. That was one that had some significant movement. Of course, climate, greenhouse gas, water have moved up. Julianne, I don't know if you want to pick up, you're closest to how those movements were, but perhaps you can shed some additional light on where you saw significant changes in those interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the important things, even though that list of the 20 or so, 25 or so topics that we've evaluated year over year, you know, some topics have stayed the same, but we've also had the opportunity to add topics. And so that was one of the things we did in this last assessment was based on kind of changing definitions in the market. We added a topic specific to the kind of climate strategy as opposed to energy and GHG emissions. And we also added some further clarity around the product lifecycle topic. Climate, energy, and product lifecycle all increased very significantly, as Michelle mentioned, and they had a lot of momentum. I think product lifecycle, that topic was new to tier 1 for Cooper Standard this year. But there were also topics that have been in tier 1 the whole time. So we did our first assessment in 2016, and innovation and the talent kind of attraction and development topic have been in the top 3 all 3 times we've refreshed the assessment. So there's certainly things that you would expect that are still very important and stay very important to the organization, but and the external stakeholders, but there are definitely topics that have a lot of momentum and urgency from, in particular, external stakeholders and kind of growing awareness within the organization.
Yeah, I almost wonder if diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is now just such an expectation that's been pushed so far that people just assume, the stakeholders have moved on to the next thing, because if you don't even have that as your foundation at this point, you're not in the game,
And we heard that feedback similarly on cybersecurity, as well as business ethics and integrity. All of the topics on the materiality assessment are important. And I think that's important to understand when you go in, because you feel this heat map. And I'll tell you, as the owner of the ethics and compliance topic, I was surprised to see it move. And I thought, oh my gosh, is it less important? And no, what you're actually hearing is that it's just a minimum expectation. Like, you can't be in the room if you don't have these things well managed and you're excelling in them. So it's not that it's any less important. It's just that shift in expectation that it needs to be a given. And without it, so no matter if it's not on your heat map, that's your problem. It just needs to be on there, because there's no question that the market, all of your stakeholders, internal and external, expect those as a ticket to entry.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the administration itself right now, I could personally testify that the, climate change, GHG emissions, we have never, we're working on very cool projects, putting solar on landfills, and I don't go through a day where I don't talk about renewables or power purchase agreements or recycling life, those. So that doesn't surprise me that that's been elevated for you guys. And I do find, some of the stability factors, I would say, interesting as well. But let's move on a little bit to another topic, which is a little bit everyone's favorite topic, litigation. So we talked about the fact that, lawyers are risk managers. Michelle's whole world is serving as a risk manager, especially with compliance. So Michelle, talk to me a little bit more about how you tried to minimize the risk of litigation on these fronts, especially since you guys, I would say, are a pace setter here. So you're dipping your toe where there's not others right now, and this litigation is just starting. And any thoughts there?
Yeah, and actually this ties perfectly. I don't know if you noticed, there's a question that was posed from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and read it because it fits really nicely with what you're asking. It says, are there any downsides to a person who has an ESG role being within the legal department? Is it better to move that ESG attorney to, for example, a corporate development department, or can the same be accomplished within the legal department? And my answer to both is that this is why having a council or committee and not just one person owning sustainability is so important. My role as lawyer, right, is to be in the room and to help ensure that the commitments that we're making can actually be followed through on, and that we really have available data to be able to support what we're reporting on in the report itself. Now, I'm there as a lawyer. I'm there also as a risk manager for the organization, but the other subject matter experts in the room are truly in the position to validate whether that's a realistic commitment or not. And so looking at this from a litigation lens, it's no different than when we look at the marketing materials that we review for an organization, when we're reviewing things for the website, any other public filing for the organization. You've got to ensure that you have a reliable source of data, that you're presenting information that's true, accurate, and timely, and that it's reliable for the stakeholders. And so answering the question that was posed from the audience, you need a lawyer at the table. Whether that lawyer sits within a different function, I don't know that that's really important, or even whether it's a risk. It's that someone that has that legal perspective, particularly from the corporate governance and public filing perspective, but that you have those other subject matter experts around you, so that there's a collaborative effort to eventually avoid potential litigation about misrepresentations that you may have made through that process.
Yeah, I mean, having the lawyer at the materiality assessment and through the entire process, rather than, the night before the SEC filings due, here, can you read this? Right, so that's it. And I would say, what we're seeing, and I would say where we're maybe getting the most involved, other than reviewing websites, sustainability report, closer language, is notification and prevention of the greenwashing claims, which are not new news. I mean, greenwashing's been around forever. These claims have been around forever. For those of you that don't know the term, it's really when someone's saying their product is more green, sustainable, lower VOCs, recyclable, whatever, and doesn't have the data necessarily to back it up. And the example that I tell people to be careful about now is historically, I feel like they got, kicked out of court fairly regularly. And, on motions to dismiss and the like, although there's been a couple of interesting cases. But most recently, there was a class certification in a case against Keurig because they basically, the argument is it was a consumer class action that the recyclability of the pods was not practical, I'm sorry. So, we're watching that case closely, but it is definitely a situation where something like that is going to be tagged right now. And I think the ESG claims are just absolutely on an uptick. We're already seeing them. There's already been notices of those claims, and the FTC green guides, which everyone who works in the space needs to know and understand, because it gives you specific recommendations of how you disclose something, what kind of caveats you have to use, et cetera. Those are up for renewal on their normal cycle in 2022. So we'll have new guides, and my guess is those new guides are going to be very much encapsulated in the ESG front. So we need to, watch those, track those, and continue to do litigation prevention as much as possible. Let's talk a little bit more about data collection, though, because we keep saying, well, collect your data, and everyone's like, okay, well, that's great. HR data is easy enough, right? So that's for the most part, on some level, you've got your caveats, but when you get beyond that, how do you do that? And maybe, Julianne, I'll lob this over to you. Can you talk a little bit about data, both collection and verification, what you've seen clients do that work, that doesn't work, and of course, Michelle, what you guys have experienced as well on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. I think data collection, and it came up on your survey as like one of the hardest, most challenging pieces. It is definitely a challenge, and where we see clients kind of starting in the beginning is usually with an Excel spreadsheet, and somebody's kind of tracking utility invoices and spend on things like that, and they're cataloging them in a spreadsheet. And if that's where you are, we can start there and move ahead. And that's certainly where, most of the clients who come to us with kind of the beginning of their journey are there. And I think that's, part of where the challenge and where the legal team can be a really great partner is helping develop very strong processes for, the kind of accountability behind that data and making sure that we feel it's accurate. Sustainability reporting has all been voluntary up to this point, and so there's been a certain amount of kind of estimation and wiggle room in those data pieces. But as we move into more regulated and more kind of highly criticized or visible disclosures, that will get less and less. And so having that kind of very strong chain of command in terms of data collection is important. There's lots of kind of programs and even Excel-based tools that can help you with that data collection, but really establishing a kind of cross-functional group of subject matter experts who own those ESG topics and kind of on a regular basis, maybe not just annually, so you're not just kind of going back to that same person a year later and saying, hey, how's it been going on that metric that you've been hopefully tracking for the last year, but checking in on a quarterly basis or having a kind of ongoing dashboard on those ESG metrics that you are hoping to report out on in your next reporting cycle. Or Cooper Standard, as Michelle mentioned, also has kind of a standalone metrics table that they publish that helps that accessibility with AI and ESG raters. So if you're kind of on the more mature end of the spectrum, there are definitely lots of kind of data software tools that you can invest in, and those can be kind of built out either by those software companies, or ERM and other consulting firms do also help customize those database tools. So depending on kind of where you are in your process, those are all options available. But you're hopefully going back to those folks on a more regular cadence than annually to make sure that you are tracking what you hope to be tracking.
Yeah, so I think when you look at data, the topic that the data is supporting is really important, right? So it's a lot easier if you're looking at a governance topic to be able to report on the diversity of your board or the diversity of your leadership team. You're not going to need a robust tracking system. That is something you can probably check in on once a year. with some very specific data. However, when you move to the operational topics and more of the things that fall up under the S or the G, I'm sorry, the S or the E, that really does need to be a part of your management system. And there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. First, when you're actually setting those goals, so after your materiality assessment, you've identified your material topics, the folks that are going to be held accountable for the data need to be a part of the goal setting process. One, to understand, is there any data in the organization today or in the relatively near future that can be used to support the tracking of those goals? From an operational perspective, odds are there is data there, right? So depending upon how you're running your business, you're probably reporting on a lot of these things already, or at least have data sources that can enable you to report on it. As Julianne was saying, it cannot be gathered as you're cobbling together your report. This needs to be a part of your monthly leadership team report outs. We actually have ours embedded in the strategic reports every month to our leadership team. It's part of the 4-ups that the teams share, so that you don't end up in December when you meet for the first time to get ready for the report that'll be published in the spring, trying to figure out what your source of data will be and how far along you are in terms of your progress towards the goal. The other piece, and this is where I think internal audit is a really important partner, and actually our CFO at the validation meeting a couple weeks ago was talking about the importance of having a control framework around your ESG commitments. So no differently than the financial commitments that we're reporting on in the forecast, what are you doing from a control perspective around the monitoring for these particular topics you're reporting on? Internal audit can help you craft those frameworks, and importantly, they can help test how well the controls are working and how well or how accurate your data sources may be. So we are just in the beginning stages of formally looking at validation. We're picking a couple of topics where we're looking at a third-party advisor to help come in and actually conduct an assessment or formal validation of our reporting numbers. ERM is in this space. They're an important partner. They actually have an independent portion of their business that can offer the third-party validation. Your audit firms, many of them are now in this space as well. So if they know your business, it's an easy place for you to bring them in to offer additional validation. But there's no validation to be done if you don't have the data. So making sure that you've got that data early on and that it is something that you can report on and track is really important. And I can't underscore that enough in terms of your entire process, having the folks at the table from the very beginning so that they're a part of the commitment making process, they're part of identifying the data, they're part of tracking it, and then ultimately reporting on it. We're kicking off our report process now, and Julianne's team is going to meet with each of our subject matter teams that own the topics and have that interview so that they can start drafting the report with us. This will not be the first time they've talked to them this year. It's also not the first time that we've been meeting to talk to them about their progress. So,
and Michelle, just to stop you for 1 second, because this is something that's been interesting to me on that. Just talk a little bit about how long it takes when you're starting your report now, and now you have these best practices. How long of people are like, oh, is that coming out in January? You know, I mean, so when are we going to see a report based on something that's kicking off now, and what's the timeline on that? I just want people to have sort of their expectations, you know, if they want to put something like that together. And this is and you guys have a cadence, I love that word, you know, where you know what you're doing in a process, you know, starting it for the first time, I think probably takes even longer, but Julianne could tell us that.
Well, so I'll just comment real quick. My answer is very different from 2016 than it is to 2021. So you can pull a report together very quickly, and ERM and folks like Heidi can help you write them, but they're not going to be the type of report that we have 5 years later, right? Mm-hmm. So you can pull together a report in a couple of weeks. But it's not going to be a report that contains a materiality assessment, heat map. It's not going to have long-term commitments and goals, and then your progress towards those goals. So Julianne, I'll hand that off to you, but there's certainly a spectrum there.
No, I mean, to answer the question most directly, we're kicking off in December and the report will be published in May. It's certainly a comfortable timeline, I would say. We do design in that process as well. So Cooper Standard's team will also that kind of builds in the time to actually lay out the PDF and make all the data pretty and all of that. good stuff that feeds into the report actually being accessible by stakeholders. But it does vary quite widely to how many stakeholders or internal subject matter experts do you have to involve, how many topics are you reporting on, have you done a report in the past and maybe we're just kind of refreshing it versus writing it from scratch, or even things like nowadays there are lots of clients who choose to go the route of having a microsite and then having a web-based report and then having a downloadable PDF. If we're trying to also build a website in that time frame, you do want probably 6 months of prep for all that content generation and all of that production of all of those things. And then of course there's many rounds of review and edit and sign off by senior leaders. And so we want to certainly have reasonable expectations for how long that's all going to take.
And a real project plan with project owners and Gantt charts and
right, which is another, just goes to show you why the tone from the top is so important, because to be able to both have the financial resources and the people resources to really focus on this, it's not insignificant in the slightest bit. So it's got to come from that place. So before we focus a little bit on best practices, I just wanted to start with Julianne and say, what have you seen a client make a mistake that's worth sharing? And you're probably going to start laughing. Have I seen a mistake? But that may help somebody and prevent something down the road. Is there something that you could share that you would say, it probably would have been better if, or if they did do this?
Yeah, that's of course there are a million,
How much
lots
time
of little
do I
mistakes.
have, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We only have 9 minutes left, so.
Yeah, we'll keep it short. I think the most significant and also somewhat readily avoidable mistake that I've seen made in even, I think it's been more common in the last couple of years, is as there's this urgent push around ESG and your stakeholders are getting more loud and it's becoming a burning platform for your senior leaders or your board, there is this jump to try to do everything right away. So let's do materiality and finish it in 3 months, and then let's do a report and let's do goal setting right away, and let's get everything out. And quite frankly, we've seen people burn out on sustainability, where you've invested so many resources so quickly, you've tapped so many internal stakeholders that they are being pulled away from their day jobs, and they can't maintain that speed forever. And so when you're trying to kind of start off on your ESG journey, trying to do it as strategically as possible. We understand there's all kinds of competing needs and voices and platforms, but if you can try to kind of take one project at a time rather than trying to boil the ocean, you'll ultimately prevent that burnout from your internal stakeholders and your sustainability teams and kind of the resource burnout of your leadership and organization. So that's kind of the biggest cautionary tale I would say, is as things are getting more urgent, try to kind of pace yourself on the maturity curve, because it's tempting to try to do it all right away, but it's ultimately not as helpful for the buy-in that you need for the long term.
Great advice. Michelle, anything on the don't do front maybe that you experienced? I know you've developed such best practices and I want to focus on those, but just wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in.
Yeah, I think the most important is to always keep this in context, right? So remember, when you're walking into a leadership team presentation, that you need to give context to why you're there and what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's been really important for us, is when we prepare for that leadership team meeting, we have like 2 weeks of practice runs. So the ERM team will share with us their initial draft. We'll usually chew it up, spit it out, give it back to them, and then they come back. And we actually put on the hat of the leadership team and try to think through the questions. And I think we're much more successful when we invest that preparation time. And then we go in with the mindset of the C-suite leader, where in this case, we actually had 2 hours, which is a significant amount of time on a leadership team agenda for one of their monthly meetings. But often,
which just says how important it is, by the way.
Yeah.
But keep going.
Yeah, and so, really using that time wisely and being clear about what you're trying to achieve. So when we were ready to form the Global Sustainability Council, Similarly, our team went through multiple iterations with all kinds of benchmarking about companies like ours and other companies and world-class companies when it came to sustainability, and really wanted to be sure that we were comfortable in what we were asking for and being intentional about, if that was declined, what was going to be the impact of that on our progress. And so it's always keeping that business hat on and remembering that, just like compliance or other risk management activities, this is a resource draw. And so you've got to be clear on what your ask is, and then what your backup plan is if you're declined. We've had to go and ask for resources to hire ERM. They help us not only draft our report, they help us with the materiality assessment, they help us with benchmarking for ratings and rankings. It's a significant partnership. And so every time we step forward to make another ask, we have to be prepared for what the implication could be if that's declined.
Yeah, and lawyers are just well suited for this anyways as risk mitigators. And the best lawyers are ones that always put their business hat on anyways and figure out the business objective. So that is definitely a good place to start. So I think Michelle led us off with such good best practices there, because that definitely is good advice, and it's a good mindset. We've talked about most of these. I love the first one. Makes me think, don't boil the ocean. I might steal that, Julianne. Setting realistic goals and collecting data and cross-functional teams. We've talked about the rating systems and the green guides. And the one thing just to keep in mind, by the way, is there's potentially guidance and regulations coming out at state level, national level, international level. So just be mindful of all of that. And we have something on our website. We have someone in our corporate group's been tracking a lot of that stuff. And I did mean to say that if anyone's interested in the survey as well, it's in the handout section here, that you guys can see it there as well. And then we've certainly talked about transparency and the materiality assessment and the stakeholders and all of that. But we have only a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to give both of you to give a minute or so of your last bit of ESG wisdom as we go into the holidays here in 2022, waiting for these SEC regs and trying to see what happens next. Julianne, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and I don't know if this is maybe wisdom as much as it is a helpful kind of heads up about, we were talking a lot about the ways that the legal team can be a good partner, and one of the things that we didn't mention was that there's a lot of discussion about which non-public information to disclose and to whom, particularly in the ESG rating space. So you might be familiar with, like, S&P Global has their annual questionnaire that accepts non-public information, and we have lots of discussions with our clients and their legal teams about how much non-public information and which ones are you comfortable disclosing. And particularly in the ESG rating space, there are now more and more solicited ratings that are tied to, like, the credit companies. So like Moody's and Fitch and S&P all also have solicited ratings where they want to be more involved and have more access to non-public information. So that's certainly a space to watch and perhaps to insert yourself in those conversations and be a trusted partner to the organization there, because more and more that's going to be a discussion as well.
Great. Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, so I think this is an incredible opportunity. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the role of the lawyer was in the past, helping the business fill out the customer surveys. Now we're in a position to be invited to the table by our sales team to talk to customers about what we're doing in the sustainability space. And I use that as an example to show that, once again, the legal department is in a position to add strategic value to the organization. As lawyers, we're really good at understanding complex topics. We're really good at learning quickly. There is a lot of information out there, like the webinar that we're doing today, a lot of white papers, where you can quickly get up to speed on what I call the alphabet soup of ESG. When I joined Cooper Standard in the beginning of 2018, I knew very little about sustainability or ESG, and I was actually brought into that space as a traditional report reviewer. So I was leading ethics and compliance and co-chairing enterprise risk management, and I was very resistant to have one more thing on my plate. But I very quickly saw what I've talked about, this dichotomy here of risk management and opportunity management. And when I started to study and understand what exactly ESG was, that's when the light bulb went off that there were a couple of advantages. One, you're already doing a lot of the things that make up the substance of the topics. And then two, it was a chance to help the organization become more effective and efficient at their risk management, because it was a place where we were invited to the table to be involved in strategic initiatives. So a lot of the things that we're trying to achieve from a legal compliance perspective now have a business necessity. So it's not just about complying, it's actually meeting a customer expectation and being able to brag about the fact that we've done something from the legal department to support what a customer is expecting from us. So to just recapitulate there, see this as an opportunity. It's a great place for the legal team to be a strategic advisor and add additional value.
And I don't even believe that you weren't doing ESG when you first came in. I mean, it's hard to even imagine that, and now you're winning awards all over the place for your work with this. So we are grateful to have both of your perspectives today, and it really, I hope everyone looks at it like a true opportunity that it is. Even though there's stakeholder mandates, it really is something that I think can bring new perspective to any business in any sector, that will allow them to be a better business and achieve their financial and business goals. So now what everyone's been waiting for, the CLE for today's program, the tracking code is T as in Thompson, H as in Hine, 1201. I'm sorry. I said it wrong. TH1201. TH1201. One more time. TH1201. And if you're not receiving our updates or invitations, please go to the website and register to receive our mailings. We really appreciate your interest in this very exciting topic. I am super grateful to Julianne and Michelle for sharing your personal experiences and your wisdom with us today. And I wish everyone a great rest of the week, a happy holiday season, and stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.